Hi, boys and girls. I am going to read a story to you called The Mitten. Now, I know when it gets cold outside, we all like to have our mittens to keep our hands warm. And in this story, a little boy has some mittens, but he loses one of them. And so when he loses his one mitten, the animals find it. And let's see what those animals do with the mitten that the little boy loses. The Mitten by Jan Brad. Dedication page. Now, when I'm reading this story, I want you to pay close attention to the pictures on the side because they tell us a little bit about what's going on in the story also. So once there was a boy named Nicky who wanted his new mittens made from wool as white as snow. At first, his grandmother, Baba, did not want to make white mittens. If you drop one in the snow, she warned, you'll never find it. But Nicky wanted snow white mittens, and finally, Baba made them. So here we see a picture of her knitting the mittens for Nicky. So Baba's worried if he loses one in the snow, he'll never find it, because the snow is white and the mittens are white. Let's see. After she finished, she said, "When you come home, first I will look to see that you are safe and sound, and then I will look to see if you still have your snow white mittens." So she wants to make sure that Nicky does not lose his snow white mittens. So off Nicky went, and it wasn't long until one of his new mittens dropped in the snow and was left behind. Oh my, look, you can hardly see it, but there it is. It blends in very well with the snow. A mole, tired from tunneling along, discovered the mitten and burrowed inside it. It was cozy and warm and just the right size, so he decided to stay. So here's the mitten, and here's the mole crawling inside. And look, if you look right here, you can see a snowshoe rabbit. That mitten has given us a clue as to what might happen next. A snowshoe rabbit came hopping by. He stopped for a moment to admire his winter coat. He was looking at his winter coat. He admired it. It was then that he saw the mitten and he wiggled in, feet first. The mole didn't think there was enough room for both of them, but when he saw the rabbit's big kickers, he moved over. Now, when it says big kickers, you know what it's talking about? It's talking about his big feet. When the mole saw his big kickers, he moved over, and now look, they're both in the mitten. Oh, and look, right here on this mitten, now we see a hedgehog. So last time we saw a rabbit, and the rabbit crawled in the mitten. What do you think that hedgehog is going to do? If you said crawled in the mitten, I think you figured the story out. Let's see. Next, a hedgehog came snuffling along. Having spent the day looking under wet leaves for things to eat, he decided to move into the mitten and warm himself. Well, the mole and the rabbit were bumped and jostled, but not being ones to argue with someone covered with prickles, they made room. So now we have a mole, a rabbit, and the hedgehog, all in that mitten. And look what we see here. There is an owl. And over here we have Nicky. He's got one mitten here. He's just playing along. Doesn't look like he's noticed his other mitten is gone yet. As soon as the hedgehog disappeared into the mitten, a big owl, attracted by all the commotion, swooped down. When he decided to move in also, the mole, the rabbit, and the hedgehog grumbled a little bit. But then they saw the owl's glinty talons, those are his claws, his glinty talons, and they quickly let him in. Look at this mitten. It's kind of stretching out, isn't it? And if you look very closely, you can see that the hedgehog's prickles are coming through. So now here comes the owl with his glinty talons. He's going to crawl in the mitten. And right here underneath this tree is a badger. Well, up through the snow appeared a badger. He eyed the mitten and began to climb in. Well, the mole, the rabbit, the hedgehog, and the owl were not pleased. There was no room left. But when they saw his big diggers, they gave him the thumb. So when they're saying his big diggers, they mean his claws, because badgers like to dig. His big diggers. And here's Nicky playing in the snow. And here we see a fox. Now, since all the other animals have climbed in, what do you think that fox is going to do? Climb in. Let's see if there's room. Oh, that looks like so much fun. It started snowing, but the animals were snug in the mitten. A waft of warm steam rose in the air, and a fox trotting by stopped to investigate. Just the sight of the cozy mitten made him feel drowsy. That means he felt sleepy. He was drowsy. The fox poked his muzzle in, that's his nose, and his mouth, poked his muzzle in. And when the mole, the rabbit, the hedgehog, the owl, and the badger saw his shiny teeth, they gave him lots of room. Do you see what's coming next? What is that? A bear? Do you think a bear could fit into a mitten? Me either. Let's see what happens. Oh my goodness. A great bear lumbered by. He spied the mitten all plumped up. And not being one to be left out in the cold, he began to nose his way in. Well, the animals were packed in tightly as could be. But what animal would argue with a bear? Well, the mitten swelled and stretched. It was pulled and bulged to many times its size. But Baba's good knitting held fast. Look at that. Oh, my goodness. And here's Nicky sitting on a stump. And look what we have here. A teeny tiny mouse. Let's see if that bear fits in, and then we'll see what the mouse does. Oh my goodness. I cannot believe the bear fit into that mitten. Look how huge it is. Well, along came a meadow mouse, no bigger than an acorn. That's like that big. She wriggled into the one space left and made herself comfortable on top of the great bear's nose. There she is, right there. And look, Nicky's discovering something. Look at this picture. He looks down, he sees his one mitten, and he looks over here, and look at his face. He's going like this. You think he's feeling? He's discovered that he's lost one of his mittens that Baba made for him. And Baba said, I'm going to check to make sure you're safe and sound. Then I'm going to check to make sure you have both your mittens. Does he have both his mittens? He does not. Let's see what happens. Oh no, what's going on? Well, the bear, tickled by the mouse's whiskers on his, because it was on his nose, gave an enormous sneeze. Achoo! The force of the sneeze shot the mitten up into the sky and scattered the animals in all directions. Oh, look. We can kind of see the mitten there. Do you see it outlined? And look, the animals are kind of landing with a thud in the snow. On his way home, Nicky saw a white shape in the distance. It was the lost mitten, silhouetted against the blue sky. So because the sky is blue and the mitten is white, he was able to see it. If the mitten were in the white snow, would it be easy to see? Not too easy, right? Because it matches. As he ran to catch his snow white mitten, he saw Baba's face in the window. There she is, in the window, looking at him. First, she looked to see if he was safe and sound. And then she saw that he still had his new mittens. And here's a picture of Baba looking at the mittens. Here's one. And here's the other. Look how big and stretched out it is. After all those animals were in there, now it's really, really big. All right, well that was a fun story, wasn't it? So I have my mitten here, and in my mitten I have all the animals. So let's see if we can remember which animals went into the mitten. Do you remember which animal found the mitten first? If you said mole, you're right. The mole went into the mitten first. And then after the mole was the rabbit. The snowshoe rabbit squeezed its way into the mitten. So we have the mole, the rabbit. Do you remember the animal that came next? I think it was a prickly animal that they gave the thumb to. The hedgehog. So there's our hedgehog. And after the hedgehog, do you remember the animal? It was an animal with glinty talons. Let me see if I can see. I think it was an animal with glinty talons. I hope I'm right. Yes, it was the owl with glinty talons. So we have the mole, the hare, the snowshoe rabbit, the hedgehog, the owl. What comes next? Do you remember? Something that likes to dig. The badger. The badger with his big diggers. They have big sharp claws. The badger. And after the badger was the fox. The fox came next. Now this was the biggest animal of all. Do you remember which animal came after the fox? You're right. It was the bear. That giant bear. I still can't believe he fit into that mitten. So there was our bear, and the very last animal of all was the tiniest, no bigger than an acorn. Do you remember what the animal was? That's right, that animal was a meadow mouse. A teeny tiny little mouse. And all these animals crawled in to the mitten that Baba made for Nikki and stretched it out. All right, well that's the end of our story. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope if you have some mittens at home, you take good care of them and you don't lose them in the snow.